Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your complex sources, the articles, the research, the notes, and really distill the absolute essence, giving you that shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we are wrestling with arguably the most challenging and foundational narrative in the Abrahamic traditions, Genesis chapter 22.
The Akedah, the binding of Isaac.
Exactly. It is a terrifying, beautiful, and frankly, an utterly contradictory story. And we have a deep stack of source material here that aims to unpack not just the events, but the seismic theological implications.
Right.
Things like the true nature of Abraham's test, the shocking conflict in the divine command, and how this ancient story really became a blueprint for later concepts of divine provision and sacrifice.
That's right. Our mission today is to move beyond just the surface reading of the text and understand what the sources identify as the core mechanisms at work here. We need to distinguish between a divine test, which the Hebrew calls naka, and, well, just simple temptation to evil. We'll also trace how this single narrative establishes the definition of true obedience and really lays the groundwork for concepts so crucial they link directly to foundational New Testament writings about Christ.
Okay, so let's unpack this and start right there at the beginning. The story opens immediately with this tension. God tested Abraham. That word tested, naka. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting here, isn't it?
A lot of heavy lifting. Not literally means to try to prove the quality of something, often through a period of, severe adversity or hardship.
So not just a quiz.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the sources are absolutely emphatic. This type of testing is completely distinct from temptation to evil.
Explain that distinction, because that feels like a critical theological pivot point for the listener.
It is. The sources confirm the biblical truth. You find it in texts like James 1:13, that God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone to evil in the sense of, luring them towards sin.
Right.
When God naka his people, he is testing them to reveal their character, to confirm their faith, and to prove their faithfulness. It's more of a purification process.
Which, of course, leads to the ultimate question that everybody asks when they read this. If God is omniscient, if he knows the end from the beginning, why on earth does he need to test Abraham at all? He already knew what Abraham would do.
Exactly, and that's the key. The test's purpose was never for God's information.
Okay.
It was fundamentally experiential.
Yeah.
Its design was to reveal those otherwise hidden qualities of Abraham's character to Abraham himself, to the generations that followed, and to show that his faith wasn't just intellectual assent, but total fidelity.
It reveals what someone is truly made of beneath the surface.
That's it. And this wasn't some snap decision for Abraham, was it? Our source material notes that Genesis 22 is recorded as the seventh and final great crisis in Abraham's life.
The seventh.
Think about that context. This test came after a lifetime of smaller trials, years of waiting for Isaac, the ordeal with Hagar and Ishmael, conflicts with kings. This was not a test for a novice.
So it was a culmination.
It was. When a believer faces a test of this severity, commentators often describe it as God's vote of confidence, suggesting that he has prepared them through a lifetime of smaller trials for this final defining moment.
So after all that preparation, we get to the command itself, which is genuinely shocking. Genesis 22:2 lays it out. Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. That just reads like a triple punch.
Oh, the language in the original text is incredibly intense, and our sources highlight the grammatical force behind it. There are three strong commands given to Abraham: take, go, and offer.
Take, go, offer.
And they're conveyed with the force of an aorist imperative.
The aorist imperative. That's a technical term, but it sounds crucial here. What does that imply?
It implies immediacy and totality. It's the highest form of command, conveying the sense of just do it now, definitively, without debate or contemplation.
No questions asked.
None. It demands a non-negotiable, immediate response. This is why the sources are so firm in stating that delayed or partial obedience is, in God's eyes, complete disobedience.
And Abraham responds in that spirit, which is what sparks the central conflict. I mean, he lived in Canaan, a culture that routinely practiced human sacrifice, right? Offering children to Molech.
Yes, and he would have been very familiar with it.
Yet, God would later unequivocally condemn human sacrifice.
And this is the moment of ultimate contradiction. The ultimate test was theological and relational. Abraham had received the promise that the entire world would be blessed through Isaac. Now, the giver of the promise demands the sacrifice of the very person who embodies it.
It boils down to this, doesn't it? Would Abraham love the gift, Isaac, his future, his security, more than the giver?
That's the question. That framing makes a conflict timeless. It's about confusing the provision with the provider.
So given the weight of that command, what was Abraham's morning like?
We see unflinching, immediate obedience. He rose early in the morning. The source material notes this haste is an indication of his resolve. He immediately starts splitting the wood for the offering. He doesn't confer with anyone. No discussion with Sarah. No appeal to his servants. He just obeyed.
Like it says in the Psalms, I hastened and did not delay.
To keep your commandments.
Exactly.
And this action launches that famous debate that runs through our sources regarding blind obedience. When you look at Abraham's response, some people, particularly outside of faith circles, they see that unquestioning submission as morally suspect. They argue that trust requires acceptable reasons.
That critique is a real theological tension point. It absolutely is. However, church leaders offer a robust counterargument. They teach that faithful fellowship is essential, often pointing out that the world portrays blind obedience negatively, but that this attitude is exactly what God requires.
And they cite other examples, don't they? Like Adam making animal sacrifices without knowing the ultimate reason why. He was just following an instruction. Precisely. They argue that if Abraham had spent 3 days debating or researching the command, he would have failed the test. His trust wasn't uninformed adherence. It was informed trust.
Okay, informed trust. How so?
Trust that was earned over decades of walking with God through 6 previous trials. He trusted the character of the giver regardless of how confusing the demand was.
So the paradox isn't about being unthinking. It's about trusting the source of the command completely, even when the command itself contradicts everything you know.
It requires total surrender to the character of God, which you've learned over time. As one source argues, even when some faith communities allow members to research or pray about difficult instructions, the results are often limited to just confirming pre-taught lessons, what they call blind obedience with a loophole.
Abraham's obedience bypassed the loophole.
Completely. It was absolute submission rooted in a long-term relationship.
Well, let's move to the psychological part of this, the journey. The trip to Moriah was about 50 miles. That's 3 days of walking, with Isaac at his side, knowing what was waiting. That journey must have been the true test.
Oh, absolutely. The 3-day walk strips away the immediate heat of the command and replaces it with this relentless, prolonged psychological anguish, and the drama just hits its peak when they arrive.
Right.
Isaac, carrying the wood, asks his father the pivotal, just heartbreaking question. Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?
And Abraham's response is everything. God will provide himself a lamb.
That phrase is the climax of his faith. This wasn't a hopeful guess. This was a statement of total conviction. The sources highlight that Abraham fully intended to complete the offering.
He believed God could raise Isaac from the dead if necessary. We see that in Hebrews.
Yes. In Abraham's mind, he'd already offered Isaac. He had already gone through with it.
And here's where it gets truly fascinating. Just as Abraham stretches out his hand, ready to slay his son, the verb used there is the Hebrew word shakat.
Yes, shakat. That is the specific verb used throughout Leviticus for ritual slaughter.
And it's the same verb.
It's the same verb used later in the description of the ultimate substitute, the lamb who was slain in Revelation 5.6. The connection is direct and intentional.
But the sacrifice isn't completed. The divine halt intervenes.
The angel of the Lord calls from heaven and gives 2 clear negative commands. Do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him. The act was complete in Abraham's heart. His intent was taken for the deed.
And then comes the famous verdict. Now I know that you fear God. But if God is omniscient, how does he now know? We have to contextualize that.
It's essential. The sources explain that this phrase in no way questions God's foreknowledge. God knew Abraham's heart. Rather, the phrase means Abraham's obedience provided the physical, tangible, undeniable evidence, the demonstration of his fear of God.
And what does fear of God mean here? It's not just being scared, right?
Not at all. The Hebrew word is yer. It signifies holy awe, profound reverence, and a worshipful submission that so complete it overrides personal survival and instinct. The sources clarify that God inspects the giver before he inspects the gift. The test proved Abraham's yer.
And only after that verdict does Abraham look up and see the ram. The ram caught in the thicket by its horns, which he then offers up in place of his son.
That ram is the physical manifestation of God's substitutionary provision. Abraham called that place Jehovah-Jireh.
The Lord will provide.
Or, perhaps more profoundly, the Lord will see to it. The sources point out that the word provide comes from the same root as prevision seeing beforehand.
So God's prevision, His seeing the need before it happens is always followed by his provision.
Correct. And the beauty of the timing, according to our material, is that God's provision always happens at the last moment, never before it, never too late. He often drives us to the absolute edge before his hand is revealed.
And this geographical location is foundational, Moriah itself.
Moriah means chosen by Jehovah, or provided of Jehovah. The sources confirm it is almost assuredly the exact location where Solomon later built the first temple. This single mountain becomes the historical focal point for sacrifice, atonement, and provision for the entire nation.
Wow. Moriah, provision, substitution. This sets us up perfectly to move into the intertextual connections, shifting to Isaac as a type of Christ, which is the central theme of the sources we're looking at.
The parallels are just too striking to ignore. The sources present Isaac as a clear type. For example, both Isaac and Jesus had their birth prophesied and preset at a specific time.
Isaac born at the set time, Jesus born in the fullness of time, from Galatians 4:4.
Exactly. And in both cases, their names were divinely given. Furthermore, both displayed a complete, unresisting willingness to surrender to the Father's will.
Isaac walked up the mountain, both of them together with Abraham, unresisting. Jesus went unresistingly toward the cross. No struggle, just submission.
And then you go back to that ram sacrifice. It cemented the concept of substitutionary atonement. The ram was the substitute that saved Isaac's life.
The ultimate foreshadowing.
It is. The ram was provided by God himself, a substitute that points forward to Christ, the substitute for all humanity. And this is why scholars identify the profound New Testament link through what they call the Akita servant complex.
That's a powerful term, the Akita servant complex. Where do we see this playing out most clearly in the later scriptures?
The most powerful evidence is in Romans 8.32. Paul directly alludes to God's command in Genesis 22, where God says he'll bless Abraham because he has not spared his son, his only son.
Right.
Romans 8.32 says that God spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all.
The shared language, not sparing, that's the intentional echo. That's the critical tie.
Absolutely. And this passage is then leveraged into one of the New Testament's foundational promises. If God gave the one great gift, his own son, he will also logically, freely give us all other things we need.
It changes your entire perspective on trust. If he didn't hold back the dearest thing, why would you ever doubt him on the smaller provisions?
And the location brings the whole story full circle. The sources strongly assert that Mount Moriah, the very mountain where Abraham offered Isaac, is the same geographical area where Jesus was crucified. Calvary, the place of the skull.
So that's the background for Jesus' statement in John 8.56, that Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad.
Meaning Abraham saw Christ's death and figurative resurrection, receiving Isaac back from death. In the provision of that ram on Moriah, he saw the blueprint right there on the mountain.
So let's bring this 4,000-year-old drama into modern relevance for you, the listener. God is not going to ask you to literally offer up your child, but the test remains precisely the same. He often requires what is precious, what defines your security.
The test is, do you love the gift? Your career, your security, a relationship, even a deeply cherished belief, more than you love the giver. And this leads us to the vital distinction between self-chosen sacrifice and true obedience.
Okay, how are those two different? Because we often confuse them.
Sacrifice can be a matter of choice, a voluntary initiative you decide on. Obedience, however, is always a response to God's initiative. You choose the timing of your sacrifice. Obedience submits your will to authority regardless of the moment, regardless of the logic.
That distinction is so powerful. One source gives a stark warning. Always guard against self-chosen service for God. Self-sacrifice may be a disease that impairs your service.
Because you're doing what you think is noble, not what you were commanded. Think about the analogy of Navy SEAL training and the famous practice of being ordered to get wet and sandy.
Right.
At any point, the instructors can give this command. When they do, candidates have to stop whatever they are doing, eating, sleeping, run into the frigid ocean, and roll in the sand until they are covered.
It's pointless, agonizing, and immediate.
Exactly. The point is not the sand or the cold water. The point is the total immediate submission of the individual's will to the authority.
Yeah.
That is obedience. That is what Abraham modeled.
And the required sacrifice for the modern believer isn't Isaac, but ourselves. A living and holy sacrifice, as Romans 12.1 puts it. It's laying your entire identity on the altar, waiting for the command. That is total surrender. What a profound journey. We've traced Abraham's ultimate test of faith, the Naka, to the moment of demonstrated reverence, the Yer, and all the way to the ultimate divine provision, Jehovah Jireh, seeing that blueprint for Christ woven throughout.
And the ultimate revelation from our sources is that Abraham wasn't just begrudgingly submitting or clinging fiercely to his life-enriching good. He gave it up as a love offering, rooted in his established faith.
Right.
The ultimate meaning of Jehovah Jireh is not just that God provides an external ram when we reach the mountain. It is the promise that if we enter into a great need by following his command, if we place our dearest thing on the altar, he will absolutely see to it that the road is cleared and the loss is recompensed.
Demonstrating his fidelity.
Precisely. So here is the provocative thought for you to carry forward this week. Considering that God often delays provision until the point of desperation, until the third day, until the knife is raised, what cherished, indispensable gift in your life are you currently clinging to, preventing you from fully experiencing the provision found only by walking onto the mount of the Lord?